Yeah, Holly, the floor is yours. You can start.
Great. Thank you very much. And let me just do a very quick caveat to start, based on a conversation that we've just had. So this talk is framed around conversion therapy legislation, and that means it is premised on there already being decent gay and trans rights protections in place. So this might end up being a talk that's really more relevant to countries like the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, America. So conversations that are happening there at the moment when conversion therapy laws have either been passed or are being proposed. I hope that there'll still be some interesting stuff to talk about in the science and the moral and political philosophy of it, but also just want to acknowledge that it's not likely to be an issue at the top of the list for the context that you're in and that I'm speaking to. So, okay. So let's start with SOGI protections, which is that acronym for sexual orientation and gender identity. So in May 2020, the United Nations put out its report on conversion therapy. And I thought because of the international influence of the UN, this is a good place to start just in trying to get a sense of the issue that's at the heart of the talk. So the report opens with this question, and I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but it opens with the question, what is conversion therapy? And then it answers that saying, conversion therapy is used as an umbrella term to describe interventions of a wide-ranging nature, all of which have in common the belief that a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, or SOGI, can and should be changed. Such practices aim or claim to aim at changing people from gay, lesbian, or bisexual to heterosexual, and from trans or gender diverse to cisgender. That's the end of that quote. And then it goes on, it says, conversion therapy practices are deeply harmful interventions that rely on the medically false idea that LGBT, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and other diverse persons are sick. And then a couple of paragraphs later, we're presented with the following evidence. So again, I quote, they say, in 2016, the World Psychiatric Association found that there is no sound scientific evidence that innate sexual orientation can be changed. And this, I think, is the issue in a nutshell. So scientific evidence on attempts to change sexual orientation, so evidence about the LGB part of the LGBT and other gender diverse persons that the report refers to, is being used as the basis for conclusions about attempts to change gender identity, which is the protected attribute. So in things like equal opportunity law or anti-discrimination law, that's the protected attribute that transgender and other gender diverse persons are assumed to have. So in a context in which sexual orientation and gender identity are bundled together as SOGI, and the people who have minority or atypical sexual orientations and gender identities are bundled together as LGBT persons, it's an easy inference from innate sexual orientation not being able to be changed to innate gender identity not being able to be changed. So both the idea that gender identity is innate and then the idea that it's similarly unchangeable or fixed. And my question really is, what if gender identity is not innate? So what if gender identity is dissimilar to sexual orientation? And that could be for a bunch of reasons. So maybe because gender identity is considerably more fluid, changing across people's lifetimes. Maybe because there are multiple pathways to coming to have a minority or atypical gender identity. Maybe because unlike sexual orientation, there's a much higher proportion of people who have false beliefs about their gender identities or who self-diagnose specific ways that they feel as being gender identity when there's a better explanation available. What if there's nothing more than an assumption about similarity here? and very good, like the best of intentions about protecting LGBT people from harm are being used to prevent any challenge to claims about gender identity, and especially claims about gender identity made by children. Now, I understand very well, because I've been writing on this topic for a while, that this might strike you as a perplexing or even highly offensive set of questions. So conversion therapy interventions aim to change people from homosexual or bisexual to heterosexual, or from trans and gender diverse to cisgender or gender conformist. So of course the obvious objection is, aren't such interventions bad, and aren't they worth prohibiting, regardless of the similarity or difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? And indeed, the United Nations in their report, and again, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but they say, they suggest that conversion therapy practices violate the prohibition of torture and ill treatment, and that they may amount to torture depending on the circumstances, namely the severity of physical and mental pain and suffering that are inflicted. So of course the objection goes, who in their right mind would argue against a prohibition on torture? And isn't peering further into the science and the politics of pairing SOGI together, sexual orientation with gender identity, and talking about SOGI, isn't that just putting dry academic concerns about scientific evidence ahead of reducing harms to real people? Now, I believe that it isn't, and that's for two reasons. First of all, the kinds of conversion practices that would rise to the level of torture when they're imposed upon adults without their consent are already prohibited by criminal law and by professional standards. So things like medical doctors and nurses, professional standards in liberal democracies, including Australia, where I am. So it's useful to think of conversion therapy as an umbrella term, covering a number of distinct types of practices, and then just to be really clear about which of these practices it might be misguided to prohibit on the basis of what might end up being a careless or a politically motivated pairing. So conversion practices aim at changing or suppressing sexual orientation in a systematic review focused on organizing the spectrum of practices that could be considered conversion therapy, posted by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. These 4 categories you see on the slide underlined in red were identified. So 4 categories of practices. These were psychotherapy, medical, religious, and punitive. So psychotherapy included 2 very different types of practices: talk-based therapies and then behavioral reconditioning. This behavioral subtype, which is perhaps better known as or better described as aversion therapy, I think that's what many people think of when they hear the words conversion therapy. So those 2 things are often conflated, and then that of course leads to it being harder to have the conversation if it sounds like you're defending aversion therapy. So aversion therapy includes things like electric shock treatments, inducing nausea in patients, clients, orgasm reconditioning, and inducing of disgust. Then there's a category of medical interventions, and again, in the countries that I'm talking about, these are largely historical, or the review describes them as archaic in nature, but they note there are countries around the world whose draconian laws may allow for these antiquated and destructive medical practices. So at least historically, this has included things like lobotomies, removal of sex organs, medication, and hormone or steroid therapy. So usually in an attempt to make gay people straight. Then religious interventions have included prayer, conversion camps, 12-step programs, and exorcisms. And punitive interventions, which are usually inflicted by parents against children, but can be from others as well, include physical abuse and humiliation. Now, it's slightly strange that this, the way that they've organized it is by either by motivation, so religious or punitive motivations for the conversion practices, or by profession of the person who administers the practice, being psychotherapists or medical practitioners. So rather than thinking about the type of intervention that is made or about the desires of the person that it's made to. So perhaps a more useful way to kind of make a taxonomy would be to think about whether they are, first of all, physical or non-physical, because that's a useful way to start getting at harms.
Holly, can I stop you? But there's a sound of tapping. That is it from your end?
Oh, is it gone now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It might have been my button. Just tell me if it happens again. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll tell you if it happens again. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another way to distinguish conversion practices would be whether they're physical or non-physical. So here you see the red arrows pointing to all of those that would be physical, and then it's just the blue arrows.
Sorry, Holly, it's happening again. So I don't know where this tapping coming from. It's not from my end, I guess.
I think it's from when she's talking.
When you're talking, something is, yeah.
Could be.
Because when you stop talking, there's no.
Could be she's speaking.
Is it happening now?
Yes.
Is it finished?
Yeah. Oh. I mean, are you speaking directly into the microphone?
There's just a microphone built into my laptop.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you far from it or close to it?
Yeah.
Close to it.
Okay, you might want to back off. That might be the problem.
Okay.
How about now?
Yeah, sounds good.
Seems okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Tell me if it comes back.
We can deal with it. It's fine. I mean, you can live with it. It's not. If it doesn't work, we can just go ahead with. Yeah.
Okay. It might also be the table that I'm on, so I can put something under it if it comes back. So let me know. Okay, so we've got the two non-physical types of therapy, which is the non-physical, the talk-based therapy as part of psychotherapy, and then prayer as part of the religious practices. And then we might also want to talk about whether they're consented to or not by the LGB person, and whether they've been initiated by the LGB person themselves or by someone else. So the whole category of medical interventions, the whole category of punitive interventions, and much of the behavioral reconditioning subcategory of the psychotherapy interventions are physical. And so they're all going to involve acts that, when performed without consent, would count as assault. Furthermore, the medical and therapeutic interventions, so under the aversion therapy heading, would likely violate the professional standards of their practitioners' fields. So that just leaves these two categories in blue: talk-based therapies and prayer. Whether they're non-physical or physical, it matters whether the LGB person is a child or an adult, whether they initiated the conversion therapy or someone else did, whether they consent to the conversion therapy, and when they're a child or adolescent, whether they're capable of giving informed consent. And of course, it also matters whether conversion therapy works, what the LGB person stands to gain when it works, if it ever does, and what the LGB person stands to lose when it doesn't work, if it doesn't. So I think, and again, in this context of Australia, where we have recently passed a pretty extreme, I think, version of this law, I think even to those who think it's clear cut that these physical practices should be prohibited, regardless of consent, we should still be open to the question of whether non-physical interventions initiated by the LGB person themselves and fully consented to should be prohibited by law. And so I think maybe they shouldn't be, and that was the shape of the debate in our parliament here. And then the second reason why I don't think it's inappropriate to look into the pairing of SOGI is that there are multiple stakeholders to the matter of prohibiting conversion therapies, especially when it comes to prayer and discussion-based therapy. So depending on the exact form of the legislation, it can put third parties, including the parents of children who claim to have minority or atypical gender identities, at risk of fines, jail time, and potentially even the loss of custody of their children. And that's already happened in a couple of cases in Australia, where there was a dispute between the parents over whether to socially or medically transition the child. So the change or suppression, have I got a slide here? No, I forgot. Okay. Anyway, the change or suppression Conversion Practices Prohibition Act 2021, which is the law in place in my state of Victoria, Australia, makes it a crime for third parties, with the narrow exception for some health service providers. So all other third parties, it's a crime for them to engage in conversion therapy. And the maximum individual penalties are up to 10 years in prison or $200,000 in fines. And the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute's final report on conversion practices, which is another state of Australia, recommended that conversion practices directed toward children should be categorized as a form of child abuse. So if children who claim to have minority or atypical gender identities are wrong, and their parents are acting in their best interests, so trying to keep their options open for the future just by refusing to outright affirm their gender identity claims, and especially by trying to avoid any medical or surgical transition, then those parents should not be put at risk of criminal punishment. And neither should any third parties acting in good faith, like teachers or extended family members, be put at such risk. And I thought, in a stroke of rather good timing, the most recent episode of Trigonometry is an interview with a parent of 2 boys, both of whom claimed to be trans. And the parents worked out that the youngest child, at just 4 years old, was just copying the older child, who was on the autism spectrum and whose difference they'd been interpreting as being trans. So the parents ended up deciding to refuse to affirm the younger child and then bringing the older child to desist in trans identification too. So for anyone who's interested, that's a good place to look for a first-hand testimony about the situation that some parents are in when their kids claim to be trans or to be the opposite sex. Okay, and then finally, the ethical and political implications of the SOGI pairing, if it turns out not to be justified by evidence of relevant similarity, they go further than just the risk to third parties created by conversion therapy legislation, so like people like parents and teachers. So suppose for just a moment that sexual orientation is in fact innate and immutable, but gender identity is neither of those two things. Or if you want to more weakly, suppose that for almost everyone who claims to have a minority or atypical sexual orientation, that orientation is innate and immutable, while for almost everyone who claims a minority or atypical gender identity, that gender identity is not innate and not immutable. And that's going to leave open that there's a small proportion of socially constructed sexual orientations and a small proportion of innate and immutable gender identities. So on this assumption, wrongly taking gender identity to be innate and immutable, like sexual orientation, causes clinicians to affirm children's and adults' claims about gender identity instead of looking more holistically for problems that the child or adult might be mistakenly self-diagnosing as gender identity. The public will be more likely to endorse laws that make legal sex a matter of statutory declaration, which is the sex self-identification laws that have been very hotly contested in the UK, that have been passed in multiple states of Australia, including mine, and in New Zealand, and are currently causing a lot of public debate in Scotland. Desisters, so jumping down to the 4th bullet point. So desisters are people who have transitioned socially and then gone back to their original sex or gender. And detransitioners are people who have transitioned medically or surgically and then gone back to their original sex and gender. Both of these will be subject to testimonial injustice, because if we think that both sexual orientation and gender identity are similarly innate and immutable, we're going to conceptualize desisters and detransitioners in the same way that we conceptualize ex-gays, which the folk view of which is that they haven't really ceased to be gay, they've just chosen to kind of suppress their real or authentic sexual orientation because they've chosen faith or they've chosen family rather than living without LGB status. Another impact is negative implications for the safeguarding of women and children or on women's boundaries, and it'll be much harder to even conceptualize these as negative impacts. So again, if gender identity is innate and immutable, then we're more likely to believe that people with cross-sex gender identities are more like those of their identity category. So someone who's male, who identifies as female, would be more likely to believe that he is like a female than like a male. And so then we'll make exceptions of such people when we generalize about their sex category. So to give a concrete example there, we might assume that statistical generalizations about male physical and sexual violence don't apply in the case of trans women. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out at the moment in Scotland in the public debate over housing trans women who have committed sex crimes in the women's prison or not. So someone was housed there, and there's been a big public outcry about having that person moved. Then there's also negative impacts on freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and freedom of speech, because these won't be taken seriously. Because again, the more real a protected attribute is, the more likely people will be to settle any balance of interests between the speech of critics and the alleged harm to the minority with that attribute in favor of eliminating harm to the minority. And then finally, if gender identity is wrongly assumed to be innate and immutable, like sexual orientation, then schools that socially transition children without their parents' knowledge or consent, which again has been happening, these schools will appear as heroes protecting vulnerable children from the transphobia of their parents who refuse to accept them, rather than as villains who are overstepping their proper limits and enforcing particular decisions about what is in the best interests of the child. So I think for all these reasons and more, it actually matters quite a lot whether sexual orientation and gender identity in fact are alike, and whether what can be said of one can be generalized over to the other. Okay, here's my starting point. I'm going to go very quickly over this because it's not the focus of the talk, but I just wanted you to understand where my scientific skepticism came from about these two being similarly innate. So this is Tasmania, State of Australia. So in the Law Reform Institute's 2020 issues paper looking into SOGI conversion practices, the Institute said as part of their terms of reference that they would review and consider peer-reviewed literature about the impact of SOGI conversion practices on people who are subjected to them and or who have survived them. So that's great. We get a peer-reviewed look at what's actually going on and whether this stuff is going on for both LGBT people and trans and gender diverse people. So in the review, they considered 35 academic papers. I read all of these papers and categorized them by whether they had anything at all to say about gender identity. So here's my table. So category A papers are the only ones that explicitly include transgender people or talk about gender identity in relation to conversion therapy. Category B were borderline cases, so papers that you could argue to be relevant, but they're actually, the one paper in that category was still about sexual orientation conversion therapy. It just included men who have sex with men, and by that it meant to also include trans men. Category C papers are just papers that have some terms in them that would make you think they could be relevant to gender identity or trans in relation to conversion therapy, but when you read them, they're not. So for example, they might use the term gender identity, but then what they actually mean by that in context is your sort of gender, your identity and sense of yourself in relation to your sex. And then category D papers are just papers that were absolutely not relevant at all. So they don't discuss gender identity conversion therapy. They don't even include any terms that are relevant. And maybe it's stupid to have separated categories C and D, but I just kind of wanted to be charitable to why they might have at least been scooped into an initial literature review, because they do have some relevant looking terms. But nonetheless, as it turns out, almost all of the papers were about sexual orientation, conversion therapy, and not about gender identity. Okay, so only one then out of their 35 papers is actually about conversion therapy for gender identity, and that's the Wright et al. Paper in category A. And it's actually a meta-study, so it tried to look at literature on this topic, narrowed down from a few thousand initial papers to 4. And then of those, there was one that was kind of dubious relevance because well, I won't go into the details, but I'm happy to talk about it if people want to. But there were 3 case studies that the authors of the meta-study described as being of poor quality, and then this one paper that, that again, I think was probably of dubious relevance. So the conclusion of that paper was that there's not much evidence in the research literature that conversion therapy for gender identity is going on. So that was enough for me, at least, to think there's something weird going on here, and to want to look into it more. So why are these two things being paired together in conversion therapy legislation in multiple countries around the world when there's so little evidence that conversion therapy for gender identity is actually happening? Now, the TLRI, in their final report, so they had their issues paper, and then they had an inquiry, and then they released this detailed final report, and they did actually address the matter of the pairing. So what's going on? Why not just SO? Why SOGI? They acknowledged a number of individual submissions. Oh, there's a bit missing, sorry. Oh, yeah. They acknowledged a number of individual submissions to their inquiry had argued against the inclusion of gender identity. So one of the reasons had been that gender identity is ideological, while sex and presumably sexual orientation, being on the basis of sex, is biological. And they gave 2 responses. So you see the first one here in 2.4.7. They said, neither contemporary health science nor the law concern themselves with the underlying bases of sexual orientation or gender identity. And then second, there is no conventional medical evidence that suggests a person's experienced or expressed sexual orientation or gender identity have separate or different causes that might support distinction or discrimination under law. And I think their first response is really weak. So the law would not seek to protect against sexual orientation and goth conversion therapy. It's not that a protected attribute has to be endogenous rather than exogenous. So we protect, for example, disability, whether it's been had since birth or incurred in the course of a life. But a protected attribute has to rise to a certain level of permanence and seriousness. So if it turns out that minority or atypical gender identity is neither, or at least for many of the people who claim to have it is neither, then it's as though the law is protecting against sexual orientation and goth conversion therapy, and then responding obtusely when challenged that it doesn't matter what causes a person to be a goth. And their second response is simply false. So there's a wealth of scientific literature on the causes of each of sexual orientation and gender identity, and these are in almost all cases approached separately. So we still don't have a definitive answer as to what causes either one, and there's substantially more scientific literature on sexual orientation. But the Law Reform Institute's response misleadingly suggests it to be settled that sexual orientation and gender identity have the same cause, bolstering the idea that because sexual orientation is generally considered to be innate, gender identity must be innate too. But there is no evidence is not equivalent to there is evidence that it is not the case that. So I think they still have not satisfactorily explained why sexual orientation and gender identity are being paired. Okay, so my next move was to go to the scientific literature on gender identity. So now I'm moving from the question of whether conversion therapy is being done on the basis of gender identity to the question of whether gender identity is innate. So if it is, my reasoning went, then it would appear to be justifiable to ban conversion therapy for gender identity as a precautionary measure, so it wouldn't start happening. So if minority sexual orientation and minority gender identity are just two ways to depart from dominant ideas about sex, gender, and sexuality, and both describe aspects of persons that are inborn, then it would seem to make perfect sense to pair them. So my next question became, what's the scientific evidence that gender identity is innate? And let me just stress here, this whole thing is a work in progress, and particularly this kind of review of all the science that there is kind of midway or 2/3 of the way. So this is just where I'm up to so far, rather than an exhaustive report on everything that there is in the literature. So there have been a bunch of studies on gender identity, which can be categorized into 5 main groups. There's brain studies, there's prenatal hormone studies, genetic studies, studies into comorbidities, and studies on childhood emergence and stability of gender identity. And I'm setting the last 2 categories aside, just because I don't think they speak to innateness. So studies on comorbidities might be better understood as looking for innate causes of both gender dysphoria and psychiatric problems, or for the innate cause of gender dysphoria. They might also both be things that are socially caused but merely correlate with one another, and so innate in neither case. And then similarly, gender identity might emerge in childhood or not, and might be stable or not, for reasons that have entirely social explanations. So I've focused on brain studies, prenatal hormone studies, and genetic studies. And I'm taking the categories and subcategories from the research into sexual orientation and then using them to organize the papers that I've found so far. So here's another table. So let me just say a few things about these quickly. So the brain studies normally separate into studies about brain structure, which is about the material features of the brain, and then brain function, which is about what the brain does. And the underlying question is whether transsexual or transgender women's brains are more like female brains, and then same in the other direction for trans men and male brains. And so far I've found 6 papers on structure, none on function, and one that I wasn't really sure how to categorize was just advancing a hypothesis about the region of the brain that's responsible for body image. And it's just worth noting, which you can see in the red here. I guess you can't see that very well. But that the structure papers are all about different things, and they're mostly not replicated. So as you see, the Garcia Falgueras and Swab paper is about the INAH3 and 4 region. The next one's about the BST. There's studies about gray matter, white matter, and so on. So the only overlap in what I've found so far is 2 that both talk about the INAH3 region. So mostly not replicated, mostly about different things. And there's also a kind of cohort problem. So the Simon et al. Paper, the 3rd one down, for example, they found some differences in gray matter, but only in homosexual transsexuals, not in all transsexuals. Okay, the genetic studies, these normally separate into heritability studies, so about family members like uncles and so on, and then into twin studies, which are normally about similarity in identical and non-identical twins, which is then helpful for distinguishing genetic from environmental factors. And again, so far I've found no heritability studies and 9 twin studies. The twin studies are generally looking at gender dysphoria, which involves a narrower category of people than gender identity, because you don't have to have experienced gender dysphoria to claim a trans identification. And there's like some interesting stuff here. So just skipping down quickly, the this is one of the twin studies, and if you just look at the first line for Australian adults, MZ is monozygotic, so identical twins, and then DZ is dizygotic, non-identical twins. So you see this study finds a correlation of 0.48 for gender dysphoria in identical male twins and 0.44 in identical female twins, compared to only 0.14 in non-identical male twins and 0.23 in non-identical female twins. So that means that nearly half of all identical twin pairs studied either both have gender dysphoria or both don't have it. That's super interesting because it's much higher than chance, but it's also not 100% concordance, so we need an explanation in both directions. So a problem for these studies is that when we're looking at female to male trans people, it's nearly impossible to distinguish genetic causes of sexual orientation from genetic causes of gender identity, because most trans men are lesbians, although of course they might not like to think of themselves that way anymore. And another problem that shows up both in the genetic studies and the prenatal hormone studies, which is marked by the studies I've put in blue font rather than black font, and then with this little line you see, is that they're actually looking at masculinity, femininity, behavior spectrum. They're not looking strictly at just cross-sex identification. So for example, in the Beister-Val paper, which is the first one of the blue, they're looking at cross-gender behavior, which is a much broader category of gender nonconformity that might be quite widespread, especially in girls. Okay, and then prenatal hormones. The theory here is roughly that sex differentiation of the brain happens later in fetal development than sex differentiation of the genitals. So these can be independently influenced by prenatal hormones, which can result in transsexuality. And the two proxies that are used are usually digit ratio, so your second and fourth finger, 2D, 4D digit ratio, and then mental rotation tasks, both of which have sex differences that are thought to have been produced by sex hormones. And so I found 7 papers on, again, all quite different things under this umbrella, and that's marked in the red in the prenatal hormones category. And then a further 3 papers on the androgen receptor gene. But again, the latter were all explored in connection to masculinity, femininity spectrum rather than gender dysphoria or gender dysphoria more narrowly. Okay, so in sum, there's quite a variety of different stuff. Most of it isn't replicated. It all seems to be targeting slightly different things, and it's fairly inconclusive, although some of it is suggestive, like the identical twin results. In the most recent review paper on this literature published last year, the authors said about prenatal hormone studies on digit ratio, so sorry, that's the paper. They said results of individual digit ratio studies in transgender people are inconclusive. About mental rotation, they said research studies have failed to find a consistent influence of gender identity on the putative prenatal hormone proxy marker of mental rotation task performance. They said about genetic studies that family and twin studies indicate a possible hereditary contribution, but that chromosomal research has been largely unproductive, and so far there have been no replicated studies linking specific genes to gender identity. And finally, about brain studies, they said that many brain regions have been implicated, but few findings have been replicated. There are also some interesting studies relating to body image and self-perception processing, but note that these don't link trans people to the opposite sex by making them more similar. Rather, they find a possible cause in trans people in particular of experiencing gender dysphoria. Okay. Bashar, can I just check in with you, because I think I'm going to have to make a choice at this point.
Yeah.
I have some further reasons to think these 3 categories won't be able to give us what we want, and then I have even if it turns out that science is completely wrong, maybe there's some moral reasons we should pair the 2 anyway. Am I right to think I should skip to the moral?
Yeah, maybe the moral will be more relevant for us. We can go back to the scientific one in case
in the discussion.
the questions. I don't know.
Yeah, perfect.
That's fine
Okay.
with you?
Then
Just to have more time on the
yeah, that
kind of
sounds
more
good.
conclusion. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And about 10 more minutes is fine. Is that right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so skipping ahead. Okay. So suppose that you've just been very convinced that there's not much prospect in the science for vindicating innateness for gender identity, but you might still want to defend the SOGI pairing, and especially in the pairing in the conversion therapy legislation, and also elsewhere. Here's the best 3 reasons I've been able to come up with so far for why we should. One, sexual orientation and gender identity are frequently entangled. So even though they are distinct things, it makes sense to treat them together. Second, they're both resistant to socialization in a way that's relevant to our rights and protections. And then third, they are the same thing, socially constructed in different ways. Okay, so first, they're entangled. Here's a bunch of reasons. First, in the older sexology literature, homosexual transsexuals were distinguished as one subtype of trans women, and as I've noted already, most trans men are lesbians, although things might have changed a bit by now with the new cohort. Second, trans people seem to use sexual orientation labels in accordance with their gender identities, meaning a trans man, I always do this, meaning a trans man who dates men will claim to be a gay man, even though they would be heterosexual relative to their birth sex. And given that most people are heterosexual, that's likely to mean more trans people using gay and lesbian sexual orientation labels. So there's overlap in the labels, even if not in the fact of it. Third, some countries make it illegal to be gay but not trans. And I had an example here, again, from that UN report we started with, where they talk particularly about Iran. So you can see here, they say individuals who fail at converting their sexual orientation will often be pressured to undergo gender-affirming surgery. So you might have people who are really gay being channeled into living as trans in certain countries, and also some countries and cultures channel their gay men into third gender roles, like at least some of the Samoan Fa'afafine. So being gay and being gender diverse end up being at least mixed together in some places. Fourth, this concept of it goes on down here, this concept of autogynephilia, which is this, again, from the older sexology literature, the name of the other subtype of trans women. This might be better thought of as a sexual orientation than as a gender identity. So, for example, Kathleen Stock has an account of sexual orientation where which thing counts as an orientation rather than a preference depends on it having serious causal consequences that make it most likely to be of interest. And so you might think, well, this is starting to have rather dramatic causal consequences in the countries I mentioned at the start, particularly for the debate over who has a right to be included in women-only spaces. So perhaps it should be considered a sexual orientation, although just note that Kathleen would vehemently reject that proposal. And then finally, studies of effeminate boys, so like small boys, 5-year-olds, for example, have found that the majority grow up to be gay. But while they're still kids, it doesn't make sense to think of them as gay. So some researchers use the term pre-gay. So if we want to protect those kids, maybe gender identity would do a better job than sexual orientation, because what they actually are at that age is gender non-conforming. And that's actually not either of GI or SO, but at least it's closer to GI than SO, because it's gender expression, which is strictly neither. So I think all these considerations amount to saying that there's an entanglement between being gay and being trans. or at least between using the terms. And this entanglement might work to justify the political pairing. After all, many of the same people will be protected by any law or policy that protects one or the other of sexual orientation or gender identity, and any law that protects only sexual orientation might miss some people who actually have a sexual orientation but are described under gender identity. So why don't we just cover all our bases and protect SOGI rather than just sexual orientation? Okay, idea number 2, they're both resistant to socialization. So some people have lived as out gay people, even at a time when it's highly stigmatized and attracted social punishments. The same is true of some out trans people. And this suggests that both are traits that resist socialization, including gender socialization to be straight and to identify with your sex. So maybe it just doesn't matter whether the traits are innate, maybe they're social, but they get fixed early in childhood, and after that it would be difficult to change them. Either way, the thought is if they're resistant to socialization and people are willing to take on high costs to live in accordance with them, then they have something in common, and we're probably doing more harm than good if we try to change them. And this gives us a justification for conversion therapy legislation protecting both sexual orientation and gender identity, even if it turns out neither is innate. And then the third idea, that they're the same thing socially constructed in different ways. So as Ian Hacking has said, new concepts and modes of description, including self-description, create new ways to be a person and create new kinds of choices for an individual. So maybe we've just responded to gender non-conforming behavior in kids with a range of options that they can take up for their own self-understanding. And the main idea that we had in the past was gay, which many such people took up. And the main idea we have now is trans, which many such people are taking up instead. So here you might know these celebrities. So in the past, you had Ellen Page, a lesbian, and Dylan Mulvaney, a gay man. So you might think these are the same people, but the prior social construction kind of rendered them as gay and lesbian. And now we have the second type of social construction. Maybe it's like just as good but different. Maybe it's better. You have Elliot Page, a gay man. A straight man, sorry. Elliot Page, a straight man. And then you have still called Dylan Mulvaney, but with she, her pronouns, and who would then be a straight woman. So the thought is maybe there's no fact of the matter here, right? There's just two ways to be a person. And as Hacking had put it, you just offer new possibilities and people take them up. And if this is right, it has pretty striking implications for the current debate, because then it would be not true, which some critics on my side complain, that the ideology of gender identity is transing away the gays. So that's a phrase that gets used, and the idea is that there's a kind of like erosion of the gay community as it's being kind of channeled into trans identity. In fact, gender identity activists might be able to equally level the charge that sexual orientation ideology in the past had been like gaying away the trans, to make the equivalent phrase, and it's just now being made to stop it. And actually the gender identity activists look like they have the upper hand here, because it's a little bit of a mystery why being gay should be correlated with gender non-conforming gender expression in childhood. But there's no mystery about why that should be the case for gender identity. So on this view, there would be no clear answer to what a gender non-conforming kid really is. There'd just be multiple ways for their difference to end up being expressed in adulthood. And I think this would justify pairing sexual orientation and gender identity in perhaps the strongest way, because then we'd be talking about literally the same cohort of people, either who have made different choices about what their difference means to them and how best to make sense of it, or who have happened to live in a time where that difference is understood in one particular way, and they've just happened to accept that way as being good enough. Okay, I have some replies, but I think I'm out of time, so maybe I'll just stop and we'll just see if that comes up in the discussion. Does that sound right?
briefly over the replies. I mean, that will be so that people can know what to ask about this. I mean, just maybe if you can go over the replies quickly, is that possible?
Oh, sure. It won't take long yet. It's just a few paragraphs. So let's do that. Okay, so the reply to the entangled, their super entangled thought. I actually kind of almost convinced myself on this point, but I would just note the weaknesses or the things still to overcome. One is that the motivation for conversion therapy legislation covering SOGI is still to protect sexual orientation, not to protect gender identity. Protecting gender identity would then just be a vehicle for protecting sexual orientation, the real thing you want to protect. This might be unacceptable politically, morally, to many of the people who support prohibitions on conversion therapy for both sexual orientation and gender identity. And then, of course, there still may be undesirable impacts of prohibiting the conversion of gender identity, such as locking in an affirmation-only approach to gender identity, which then actually ends up being anti-gay because so many gender non-conforming kids actually grow up to be gay. So it's not clear to me on balance whether someone who wants really strong protections for sexual orientation minorities would gain more for gay people by agreeing to the protection of SOGI instead of just SO, or by refusing it. So that's where I'm at on that so far. On the both are equally resistant to socialization point, I think this is biased towards the cases that we see, which might be a tiny proportion of the cases that there actually are or would be under more favorable social conditions. So there could be lots of people now who don't consider themselves either gay or trans, but might do in a more tolerant or more liberal climate. So maybe the out gay and trans people are just the people who are less socially sensitive. And that means that socialization and culture are still relevant. So whether it's wrong to attempt to change or suppress these identities, I think depends on moral and political considerations, including about harms. And I think there are more harms on the trans side because of the medical and surgical transitions. And then finally, to the it's the same thing but socially constructed differently thought, the hitch is that sexual behavior in humans would have to be extraordinarily plastic if gender non-conforming boys were actually, as a baseline, heterosexual, but are offering them an interpretation of themselves as gay, right? They're just little kids who like flamboyant clothes, let's say, and the thought is supposed to be that because we socially construct that into an idea of being a trans woman as an adult, if we do it in the gay direction, we socially construct that into being a gay man as an adult, that we can actually create attraction to males. And at least from everything we know in the science of sexual orientation, which I haven't talked about here tonight, but I've read quite a bit of, that seems to be almost too implausible to take seriously. So it's not likely that human sexuality, at least in males, is plastic enough for this kind of explanation to work. But maybe it works for some people, so it's still interesting to talk about as part of an argument. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I think we can open the floor for questions. As I said before, we'll give each speaker, each questioner 2 minutes for setting their case, their objection, their comment, their remark. Please, can you raise your hands through the hand raising signal, and I will give you the floor. Let's see if we can. Can I see everybody here?
Stop sharing my slides.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Someone sent a text.
Okay. Can you read this? It's an old one from for.
The chat sends
Yeah. Yeah. Any. Let me see if we can put the layout.
If you want, you can unmute him.
Yeah. Can I, any questions there? Okay, Assam. Assam, you're unmuted now. You can unmute yourself now. Yeah.
Yeah, so like throughout the whole thing, I just had the question about why the innateness, the way this issue is framed, because to me, it's the intuition behind pairing sexual orientation and gender identity together was just like how, well, it's not up to the priest or the community or the state to dictate who I can have sex with. It's not up to them to dictate what gender I identify as. So nobody has the right to try to convert me, and that on itself, regardless of whether those two turn out to be socially constructed or biologically, I mean, it's probably has many factors, and like we have to see the science on that. But again, the political point is quite neutral on it. It's the pairing is connected to historical oppression, and that gives us reason to motivate it. So yeah, that's my main complaint about this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Assam. Yeah.
So that I think, yeah, I think I understand. I understand the question. Instead of thinking in terms of why the two are similar, the sort of born this way narrative or it's out of my control narrative, just think it's part of a big bundle of things that are about my right to self-determine or self-express, and that others don't have a right to interfere in. I guess that could be right, but the puzzle is, what do those, like, surely there's a lot of such freedoms. Like we have an interest in self-expression and self-determination in all sorts of ways. So what is it about gender identity, cross-sex identification, being trans, that, what is it about that means that needs to go hand in hand with sexual orientation, being gay, and then kind of be protected in this very hand-in-hand way? And again, maybe I'm just like paranoid. It's quite possible from this like 5 years in this like feminist fight. But I think it's suspicious because they seem so dissimilar to me. So I see something more going on in the way they are being constantly paired together. Like it's suggestive, or it's supposed to like lend legitimacy to gender identity from sexual orientation. So I don't know, I'm sure we have time to reply because we don't seem flooded, but I'd be interested to know if you think there's any justification for why it makes sense to you that they are such a pair on that justification.
Holly, we can't hear you. I can't hear you. Oh, okay. Sorry, whatever. Now we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We have, I think, Sam's question worth coming back to, but maybe we can come back to it later because I see more hands now. So Sam, we're going to come back, and I think I have a follow-up thing on your question, but there is Bridget Khouri. I'm taking them in order as I can remember, and then there's Bana. So Bridget, please, the floor is yours. I'll unmute you. Yes.
Thank you, Bashar. And thank you also, Dr. Holly, for the talk. I'm a clinical psychologist, and one of my areas of expertise is LGBT and sexuality. So I was very interested to hear what you have to say. I just want to give you a bit of information about the context that we're in. The Lebanese Psychological Association and the Lebanese Psychiatric Society both in 2013 issued a statement in the press against conversion therapy in Lebanon. And it was actually we were the first Arab country, I don't know if we still are actually, that issued such a statement. I heard your talk and I saw what you presented. My concern is theorizing and philosophizing is very different from practice. And I'm worried that will actually impact the practice and impact the ability of people to access services and to be offered the proper services within a social justice and human rights lens, and of course the tolerance and acceptance that is needed for people who need it. I'm surprised that in your talk about conversion therapy, you left out affirmative therapy, because this is actually the main issue. We cannot talk about conversion therapy without giving the other side of it. What struck me, one of the things you said, is about the consent. So to you, if somebody is an adult, has a gender identity issue and consents to conversion therapy, they should not be penalized to access it or to have it. I understand that. However, I think people should be informed and be given the chance of the other side, which is
Yeah.
being actually offered affirmative therapy, which is not going to push them in either way, especially when we talk about children and educating the parents about that. I would be very worried to have parents taking their kids to conversion therapy when they are not even given the education and the option to take them to just therapy and
Yeah.
explore actually what is happening with this child, and not necessarily gearing them in any direction. I did a study on transgender in Lebanon. We had, of course, not a large sample, but and we were measuring, because it was during when the diagnosis came out of the ICD and the DSM-5, and where the stress was one of the main criteria for diagnosing supposedly gender dysphoria. And it turned out that the distress that the transgender individuals feel is actually much more related to the violence and discrimination they get from the community and their society and their families, versus from their own gender identity. So that was more the issue. Now, in terms of the why are we pairing them and why the separation, and what's interesting also from the data you showed, or the research you showed that is not replicated, if I may add, maybe many trans people do not actually access conversion therapy because transgender and gender identity is really an innermost sense of self. It is not really based on a behavior, which sexual orientation initially could be starting or is based on a behavior. And this is why I think transgender do not access conversion therapy much, because maybe many they know about it, and also these are people who do not want to change. These are people who want to be accepted, and they want to be able to express their innermost identity in a safe space and in a respectful way. So versus, and I have seen actually personally, I have had people coming in, I have had parents bringing in teenage kids or even adult kids asking me to change them because they're claimed to be gay or lesbian. And of course, I educate them about all that, but I haven't seen transgender coming in asking for conversion. So these are. I'm gonna stop. I'm sorry, Bashar. You probably think I've talked too much, but
No, it's fine. That's fine. I wasn't timing for you, so that's fine.
So these are just a few of my comments, and of course, adding that, AUB, really, we pride ourselves for, tolerance we have now in Office of Inclusion, Diversity and Equity, and we pride ourselves on that. So I would love to hear your comments about some of the things I brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, I think, Holly, the floor is yours, and then we have a question from Bana, from Talia Katura.
Great, thank you so much. It's very interesting, to hear from, obviously I'm an academic, right? So I'm quite divorced from practice. So it's very interesting to hear your perspective on that. I'm not sure, so it's two things I can comment on, but I'm not totally sure I understood the point about why trans people might be asking for less conversion therapy or experiencing less. I take the point that it's a more private or hidden trait to have, and so it might attract less direct discrimination or stigmatization. So maybe there's knowledge of social disapproval or lack of understanding, but it's not as targeted at the individual if they're not out or if they're not obviously transgender, because sometimes you can tell by looking. So I'm curious about who the people are who you say you see but who don't ask for conversion, whether are they passing transsexuals so they're happy but their problems are about feeling a lack of acceptance, or are they people who haven't socially transitioned but just know who they are and would want to if the environment was more friendly. So again, if we get a chance to come back to that, or I'd like to hear more about that. I will comment on two of the things that you asked about. Why not affirmative therapy? And again, I think if what you mean by that is something like, yeah, I think they call it watchful waiting here. So you definitely don't stigmatize sexual orientation or gender identity minorities, but you offer some approach like, you know, not every child who thinks that they are the opposite sex, you know, actually is. So let's wait and see. Like that's fine if you are, but it's also fine if you're not, right? So I think there's the thought from the people who are especially worried about this in children, is that there are ways to provide a supportive and affirming environment where the individual can, you know, discover themselves and their identity without being this kind of affirmation only approach. And the thing that's really built in, like if you read our legislation we have here in Victoria, it's really like locking in this kind of affirmation only by all adults in the child's life. So if the child comes to school and says they now want this new name or these new pronouns or they are this thing, these adults are supposed to like immediately go along with that, and questioning it or telling the child, yeah, I don't think you are actually, I think you just admire your older brother or whatever else. That's actually kind of on the like the side of action that the law now is kind of symbolically saying is unacceptable. And so that, but again, I can see how this just might be such a difference in our context, right? Because we have this like super progressive state and legislation that I think has gone so far in trying to like celebrate and protect trans people, that it's kind of gone into this like you absolutely cannot question it against a social backdrop in which we know there's been all these changes to the cohort, like way more girls now saying that they're trans and way bigger proportions of young people. So yeah, something like watchful waiting and being supportive and cautious would be absolutely fine. So if that's what you have in mind, I think I agree with that. But something like actual affirmation only, let people tell you who they are, believe them, don't ask questions. I think in my context, I disagree with that. And maybe just, shall I say one more thing, or am I talking too much?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just on the moral dangers thing, I mean, I don't know if I really have anything useful to say, but again, I think this is like, it's not isolated to this issue, right? There just always is this question of theorizing on difficult, controversial, heated topics that involve vulnerable minorities. Yeah, maybe you end up setting back someone's interests, or maybe the wrong person uses your work for the wrong purposes, or you yourself, like the way you're doing it is actually going to like cause some harm. So I'm very conscious of that. But at the same time, and again, in my context, I feel like the set of ideas around what's happening with the pairing of sexual orientation and gender identity, and ideas about gender identity now, they're causing harm. And so I sort of think we just have to start talking about that. Yeah, so I don't know, I'm sure that won't be satisfactory, but I'm really just saying I'm conscious of it, but I don't think we can be quiet about this, and especially, or like be silenced about this, because there's a risk of harm to vulnerable communities, because there's a risk of harm on both sides, like to gay children as well.
Thank you, Holly. Bana, you still have a question?
Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
keeping track of the sequence. So, Badr, I saw your hand, so you'll be third after Bana and Talia. Bana, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you for this. I'll have to preface by saying a little bit about, again, the background. I think following both Brigitte and Isam's question, I think my question builds on that because of the concerns that I have. It often worries people who are interested in moral and political issues in a certain context when they hear about problems in another context, and I wish we had those problems. I wish we had the problems of overcorrecting. And it seems that there's so that's what you're suggesting, is that this is a case of overcorrection and perhaps scale it back a little bit. And it's very difficult to have this conversation when that's in a very small minority of the global population, right? So you're having a conversation that affects a few countries that consider themselves extremely liberal, whereas the majority of the world isn't suffering from those problems. That aside, just a methodological issue about the talk. I was a bit surprised at for something that's clearly a social political issue having to do with there's a history to it, and there's a history of suffering of those communities because of the discrimination that they faced. For the arguments, the historical arguments, not to be given much weight or not to be addressed. So I would assume that there's a large association between the rights of gay people and trans people because of the shared history of oppression for both of those populations that had been grouped together as quote unquote deviants, right? So for the longest time in which people started recognizing these categories, those were lopped together, and then they ended up, with a shared history. And this shared history for especially for trans individuals who happen themselves to be gay may have become infused with their identity. So one methodology I would have assumed that one would, when tackling these questions, one would try to do is to interview these individuals and say, well, why do you associate these things together? Because they're what you think identify you. And so let's hear from members of those populations what their self-image is. And because, again, the gender identity is about one's own self-image. Let's hear from them. What do you think this association, what do you think failing to pair these two things would lead to? How do you view yourself, right? So it felt to me a little bit strange for us to be imposing whether this pairing should be happened if we ourselves are not members of the community or not part of this struggle, especially given that these are social categories. So I'll stop there. Otherwise, I could keep talking.
Okay. I mean, I'm not an empirical methods person, so I wouldn't be doing interviews or that style of work. But let me think out loud about whether that is necessary. So yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's the case that if you did interview a lot of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people and trans people, they would agree that the alliance is important. So my sense of how this debate is playing out, at least in the countries I mentioned at the start, is that there's like a very strong LGBTQIA+ sense of community or alliance. Rainbow community is what it's always called in New Zealand. I don't know if people would have a real story about why. I can think of lots of strategic reasons why, like it's just better to have strong alliances and larger groups and yeah, try to like connect over some shared goals and I don't know. So yeah, so maybe what would that help? I mean, I find myself in a minority intellectual position arguing with almost everyone, not only in the LGBTQIA+ community, but also in the feminist community, because I'm suspicious of gender identity and very suspicious of what's going on with the overcorrection and what that's doing to feminism and gay spaces and women's spaces. And again, like totally take the point, what a great problem to have, like absolutely take that point. And yeah, maybe it wasn't the right talk for this forum. But yeah, that's just, sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit. I'm just trying to articulate that I don't know what it would really change for me if it turned out that the majority of people in the LGBT community thought that the two did belong together or were similar. Because the question for me is whether they are, and whether there is this practice happening to both of them, or what politics are being achieved by constantly bundling them together. And I want to try to figure out, when did that start happening? Whose interests are being served by putting them together constantly? And what's going to be the ultimate effect of that, even if it's only the effect of that in Australia and on like these people that are already pretty well off. So I'm, yeah, what? Just going to be sitting in the corner disagreeing with everyone. Thank you. Yeah. Bashar, I think you're muted.
Questions, then I will
We didn't hear most of what you said, I think.
myself from questioning or commenting was question and questions so along the same lines. But let's move ahead with the questions. There's Talia. Please, Talia, it's your, can you, Talia? That's I
yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this talk, and I want to build on the previous questions that were asked. So you've explained your point under the belief that gender identity is not innate, whereas sexual orientation is, correct?
I haven't got a position yet on sexual orientation, but I was accepting for the sake of argument that it is, and then asking about the comparison. Yeah.
Okay. Well, to build on that argument, sexual orientation, or rather our interpretation of it, has a socially constructed component. So cultural norms and developments of our understanding of sexual orientation are constantly adapting. And not to mention that, much like gender identity, sexual orientation is fluid and can change over time for the individual. So do you have any other examples in mind that can help me better understand why these two shouldn't be paired, or just more specifically, why we can't assess conversion therapy for gender identity in a similar way to sexual orientation?
So I think there's some fluidity in sexual orientation in women, but not so much in men. And I can accept that it has a socially constructed component, but I would certainly reject the strong social constructionist view of sexual orientation, that there hasn't been like a historical constant, or that these categories aren't real. So I'm not sure how far you want to go in the social construction of sexual orientation, but I wouldn't go all the way and then try to put the two on the same ground by thinking that they kind of both are just socially constructed categories. What was the second thing you said? Sorry. Can you just repeat the...
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Why
Sorry.
can't we assess conversion therapy for gender identity in a similar way to sexual orientation? Because again, I'm emphasizing on the fact that sexual orientation and gender identity are things that are interpreted by the person who's identifying as either a certain sexual orientation or a gender identity. So why can't we assess conversion therapy in a similar way for both?
So I think the question would be, do they do the same wrong, right? So there's lots of evidence on, and again, I think this tracks back to, especially in males, this identity being fixed fairly early, it being very like difficult to try to suppress. So if you read, like maybe I have these kind of first-hand testimonies of like coming out in homophobic societies, and then like really trying to repress that. That's just really difficult. So with that in mind, living in a society that's highly stigmatizing about that identity, that can cause a lot of guilt and shame. It can create long-term psychological impacts. And that's all separate from like, you decide that it would be better for you to fit in with your society, so you're going to go to some therapist or doctor, and then whichever kind of practice you ended up being subject to. So I think it does matter a lot that if that stuff really is innate and there would be nothing you could do about it, because it affects the harms that are done to you when that identity is stigmatized or when you are subject to attempts to change it. So if, and again, this is the kind of overcorrection hypothesis, say there's like, I don't know, say it's 50% like of the current people in Australia who say they have minority gender identities, say they really do, and the other 50% don't, right? They could have claimed a gay identity instead, or they could have claimed there's a variety of motivations, so whatever that is, they're not being wronged in the same way, and indeed they might even be being helped, right? So if that is a child or a sort of early teens person, and then you're refusing to affirm, say this is a 16-year-old girl who hated going through puberty, who hates being sexualized by boys who are watching too much porn, right? Who's kind of really struggling with her accepting her body and her femininity, and now claims to be a trans boy. If she isn't one and you refuse to affirm her, you're not doing the same kind of harm to her or wronging her in the same way. And indeed, you might actually be saving her from unnecessary top surgery or unnecessary medical implications of going on testosterone for how many years, effects on sexual function, fertility, and so on. So I really think it's like, it does matter actually if they're both innate or not, because it really matters when they're stigmatized and when there are attempts to change them or refusals to affirm them, what harm that's doing or what benefit that might be doing.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a line of questions, so I'm going to ask people to be as short as possible in their questions and answers. I have Badr, and then I have Mitra, and then I have Zakaria, and then I have Chris next to me here. He's not on the screen, so you invent him. He exists. So Badr, your question, please. Badr, are you still with us? Okay, Badr is maybe away for a moment. Maybe we can go to Mitra. Mitra is... Mitra, the floor is yours.
He says he's muted.
It's muted. Okay, okay. Let me go back. Let me go back to Badr then. Okay. Are you?
I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I sent my question via the chat, but I think it went unnoticed, so I'll verbalize it and flesh it out some more now.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was noticed, but I couldn't read it because it didn't have the chance to read it. Now you can say it. It's better, actually.
Okay. No worries. Perfect. So thank you for the talk. I wanted to say that listening to your discussion, I think you recognize that a conversation on conversion therapy is not only largely scientific, but falls squarely in the fields of clinical psychology and psychiatry, which are the most equipped to assess whether it's effective, ineffective, harmful, or not. And these are scientific disciplines that deal with scientific evidence. And you spent a big portion of your talk discussing the scientific evidence surrounding conversion therapy and the innateness of gender identity. And you used that as a premise to back up your position on the SOGI pairing. But that being said, when it comes to the science, organizational bodies that represent the scientific consensus in psychiatry and clinical psychology and medicine, in other words, the experts in these most relevant fields, they seem perfectly happy with the SOGI pairing, although they're dealing with the scientific literature. When they make statements about conversion therapy, unambiguously, they condemn both. They say that they condemn and they claim that conversion therapy is ineffective and harmful for both sexual orientation and gender identity. So why is it that you use a scientific argument, but the scientists in these fields disagree with you and draw different conclusions from the scientific literature about the SOGI pairing? They don't share your position on it.
Yeah, I know, it's weird. But surely the scientists don't get to just have political or moral positions that are not justified by and reflected in their literature, right? So you would expect the position of these expert bodies or organizations to not just be politicized or not just be like the progressive line of the minute, but to be able to be backed up with science and evidence. And that is not the case. And it's really strange. And there are some people, some journalists, for example, trying to like look into that thread of how did we get to that point, or who actually are the people making up the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and is that activists, right? So like trying to unpick how we possibly got to this point. So I don't disagree with you about what those like expert bodies are saying, but I disagree strongly about their justification for saying it, because it should be that I can see, okay, this Law Reform Institute has done a review and now it's strongly recommending going forward with prohibiting conversion therapy for these two things, and they've said they have an evidence base. Great, I'll just go and look at the evidence base, and I see that that justifies their outcome. But that's not what happened. Their evidence base absolutely did not justify their outcome. And then when I wrote to the guy, he said, well, that was our terms of reference. So we have to act on our terms of reference. Okay, so it's packed in from the start. So now what? Why was it? So I think I just feel like I'm like a detective. Like I'm just trying to work out what is going on here, and when did this idea get started, and what really actually is gender identity, and what's going on here. Yeah, so for me, there's just like a big mystery here. So I know you might think that just sounds like a conspiracy theorist has showed up who just denies the experts. Like I might think that myself in another forum about another speaker, but all I can tell you is that I've now read heaps of this literature, and it's not there, the stuff that should be there given what these experts are so confidently saying. And that is actually all through this debate. Like it shows up with, there's like these zombie statistics about suicide, for example. Like you're supposed to just accept these kind of hyper progressive laws about, statutory declarations, $20 to change your legal sex, because otherwise there's such a high suicide risk in the community. And then you try to look into the rates that are being quoted, and you can't find them anywhere. So yeah, all I can say is, yeah, that there's the justification surely matters. It's not enough that an expert just kind of states a certain political position. It matters whether they can back it up, and I don't think they can.
Thank you. I hope we could get back to these questions, but Mitra, you're unmuted now.
Okay, so I second what Badr has mentioned in terms of comment, and I think regardless of whether I will not go into pairing or unpairing sexual orientation or gender identity, I would rather focus on the harms of a therapy by itself that was proven not through political studies to be harmful, but through scientific and neuroscience studies to be harmful therapy. And whether, and I wouldn't really go into debating the pairing and unpairing of sexual orientation and gender identity, because this is a completely separate debate. But I would say that a therapy that was found to create problems and to leave major repercussions would not be promoted for gender identity, for converting people on the basis of gender identity and not sexual orientation. So it's a therapy that was proven to be harmful and that should not be promoted at all. And this goes back to what Dr. Houri had mentioned in terms of, instead of promoting conversion therapy, we can ask for simply therapy if there is a need to, just to understand what the person is passing through, and not to change or impose a certain direction to the person. And I had a sense through your presentation that the main concern is mostly related to the transitioning of minors and the position of third parties to the transitioning of minors, which in my opinion should be tackled from a completely different angle, not the pairing, unpairing, not the promotion of conversion therapy, but rather from a law perspective, a debate that addresses what minors can decide on, what decisions can minors take. But that's also a law debate that, because in the majority of what you mentioned in the presentation, it was repeatedly tackled as a concern, the transitioning of minors and the decisions that the minors and the schools are taking in lieu of parents. So, and the criminalization of parents when they try to decide on behalf of their kids. So that's a completely different debate that I think should be tackled from a law perspective and not from a conversion therapy angle.
Yeah, the problem is that the model, at least in the UK, right, is Gillett competence. So the idea is that some minors are competent enough to give informed consent to their own medical interventions, and that very much depends on their own maturity, right? So it can be kids of the same age, one can be Gillett competent and one cannot. But the idea that we should want to defer on Gillett competence grounds to the child about their gender identity, I think is parasitic on the idea that gender identity, like sexual orientation, is this kind of innate, unchangeable feature of the person. So the child knows who they are, right? So if you think of it in the model of being gay, like, yeah, you could have a 9-year-old boy or an 11-year-old boy who knows he's gay already. He's just had those experiences. He's in the best position to know. If you think the same way about trans, then I think it makes sense to have that model and treat them similarly. But if you think it's something completely different that's going on with trans identification at the moment, or at least the percentages are like 10% is what it always was and 90% is something else, then I don't think you want that model anymore. So you don't have a reason to just kind of like let the child lead because the child knows who they are. So I don't think that would be sufficient in this case because of exactly how dissimilar I think the two are. And what you said first about looking to the harms of the therapy itself, again, I'm not sure that will work. So it's true, we have like quite a lot of evidence now about how harmful these like religious kind of prayer-based therapies aiming at heterosexual orientation have been for some people. But the reason why they're harmful is because they mostly don't work. So they occasionally work in the sense that someone can like reconcile themselves to a heterosexual family life, for example, or choose the church, but they often don't work. And then the person is like filled with guilt and shame because they slip up, and then they feel like they lacked discipline. So there's a sense that the sexual orientation is really like always bubbling through to the surface and can't be repressed. But that's the harm, right? The harm is like this therapist telling you, you can change, you just have to want it enough, you just have to be disciplined, you know, and then you feel shame and guilt because you can't. But that might be completely different to what's going on, again, with trans identification in at least some cases. And so then the therapy wouldn't have those harms. So again, I think you just got to put the harms and the benefits on a scale. And I really think it's going to turn out you don't want to have this absolute legal prohibition on change or suppression when it comes to all claims about gender identity.
Okay, sorry. There's Zakaria and there is then Chris and there are others in line. So we still have time. Zakaria.
Yes. I have two questions, one for Holly and one for Bashar. For Holly, my question is, so what's the end result of your investigation, right? Because you're also working in a setting where there's so much hate speech around any kind of body agency, and we can't trust governments and systems to understand these boundaries and how they use them. So where's the end result of this investigation, especially within this context that is kind of waiting for any narrative to feed into its hate speech? And my question to Bashar is, why is AUB hosting such conversation? Even if it's a problem within AUB, in terms of like, if there's a war pronoun happening, everyone there is an adult. So being minor is not an issue in terms of if this is an issue that should يعني or matters to students. So where does this fall? Like, you can also introduce the project where all of this conversation falls in, but AUB is a big institution, and when it hosts conversations in a very يعني hate enticed being every day against LGBT people, to host such a conversation, like, what is the point now? I don't want to say like don't have these conversations. Please have the conversations you want to host, but why now? Did AUB take this into consideration? Did you take into consideration the positionality of AUB? And lastly, amazing interventions from everyone and questions. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Holly, you can probably answer both questions if you want.
Why don't I start?
The second one was about hate speech and stuff like that. You know, there's something dangerous about this talk and the hate component of it. Maybe that's an occasion to address this. Now, why we host these things, I can say a few comments, but I'd rather save the day for Holly. I'm around here. We can always debate these things. We can have a platform on what to be hosted and what not to be hosted on campus. That's something we should be debating. But maybe since it's addressed to the content of the guest, the content of the thoughts of the guest, I'll let the guests here say how it's in what way you think people think it's inappropriate to host this kind of talk, and what would the response be? And plus the other question, yeah.
Yeah, so if I can start with the question to me, I think the end result for me is that I would not support the pairing of gender identity and sexual orientation in legislation. It's too late in my state, so the legislation was passed with the pairing in it, but I would advocate in progressive states that are thinking about introducing this legislation that they introduce it for sexual orientation only. And I have advocated for that in the UK, and I gave a talk, a sort of earlier version of this talk there. And in fact, that does look like it's going to be, of course, not connected to me, but that is the position that they seem to be going to take, that they're very worried because they're having a big conversation there about the ideology around gender identity and all the various challenges that that's raising. So it looks like they are not wanting to lock in an affirmation-only approach to gender identity. So they're going to go ahead with conversion therapy legislation just for sexual orientation minorities and not for gender identity minorities. So I think that's the end. The upshot or the end of the project for me is coming to a position about the pairing and what's going on politically with the pairing, what it's trying to achieve, and then kind of coming to a position for myself, both philosophically and then related to any activism that I want to do in the name of LGBT rights or women's rights. I don't think it's hateful to have this conversation. I think that claim is often used to shut women up and shut up lesbian, gay, and bisexual people who have questions about gender identity ideology. I'm sort of just not prepared to be shut up on these issues. I think there's a legitimate question, which is like, in contexts where there's a lot of mistreatment of or stigmatization toward trans people or gay people, should everyone progressive just be kind of on the like, yes, more rights, yes, more protections, don't ask questions? Should that just be what they're saying in public because we so desperately and urgently need that? I can certainly take seriously that might be true, and that, yeah, there's certain contexts where this talk would be inappropriate. I certainly don't think that's the case in Australia or the UK or anywhere that I've given this talk, in the United States as well, or versions of this talk, but maybe it's the case for your context. I don't know enough about what's going on there for sexual orientation or gender identity minorities. So I think that would be a decision that your hosts had to make. But I hope that I haven't, and I don't think that I have said anything hateful here. I've talked about science and I've talked about the morality and politics of pairing these two things together anyway.
Yeah, just briefly, I don't think hosting this talk is inappropriate in Lebanon, for the same reason that Lebanon is far behind in those respects. So it's not something that's being debated in the law, and that's going to be affecting the trans community negatively. It's a debate that I said we will not have the luxury to have here in the sense that it's not affecting our laws, which are still lagging behind in a dramatic way in all respects, from the feminist agenda, from the gay lesbian agenda, and definitely from the trans agenda. So I think it's an intellectual exercise which we do all the time. We discuss social justice and equality, even though we live in Lebanon where the basic elements of a state is not there. We have corruption deep to the bones and dysfunctionality. It doesn't prevent us from hosting somebody talking about social justice, whether it should be, people should be equal based on their, outcome equality or opportunity equality. These issues are irrelevant to Lebanon because things are much worse than that, but doesn't mean that we should not get advanced debates because we have a much worse situation. So in terms of resources, this is the philosophy department. Remember, we are known for talking about things that are not immediate. This is more also reach that position. We might engage also in a global debate because we are not here only in Lebanon. We also by gender ideology and gay rights and sexual rights from a global community. So we are part of that global community and we engage in the debate that's happening there, which would enrich our understanding of our local context as well. So that's my idea. Again, on the hate speech, I don't see there is any hint of hate speech. Of course, there might be, maybe some implications on people like Holly's position on certain groups. Again, if I'm arguing for lower taxes, this will have implications on the poor. But I might be given an argument for why taxes should be lower. I might be mistaken. And as a result, there will be people harmed who are not getting redistribution as they should be. But it doesn't mean that I'm aiming at that. But of course, these views have to be debated. To debate them is not to accept them. And I don't think there is any requirement you accept. And I'm sure most of the audience comments show that they are not actually endorsing, or at least they're questioning. Maybe at some point, maybe they could convince Holly also of some of her that some of the stuff she said wasn't. I think she's reflective on her own work, and I think we are reflecting on our own views, and that's the whole point of academic debate. And initially, I should say that maybe because initially this was should have been part of a series of lectures on ethics and gender, ethics of gender and feminism, and this happens to be the first talk. But if the series continue, they will be hearing other voices as well. So that's not selected. That's why this talk. It's a part of a endeavor to include many voices on the issue of the ethics of gender and feminism. So hopefully in the future we will see different voices as well. So it's not an agenda here in that sense. Sorry, Chris. Yeah. Chris is showing himself.
Hi. Thanks for your talk. I just wanted to get clear on something that seems to be a consequence of your argument. And maybe I think you said something about it, and maybe I missed it, but it seems that what you're saying is you would allow conversion therapy for gender identity. Is that correct? But
just these two forms, which is the talk therapy and the prayer-based therapy.
Those you object to, or those you say are okay?
No, those I think are okay. So my intention with that diagram separating out the physical from the non-physical and the consensual and so on was to say these are the two kinds that I think we should still be open-minded about. And it's the talk therapy that's really at question for gender identity, because you go to a gender clinic and does the clinician immediately switch to your new pronouns and name and affirm you, or are they kind of cautious and skeptical?
Well, the issue is whether they should apply any sort of conversion therapy to get you to convert or change your mind from considering a gender identity different from your biological sex, right?
Well, the word therapy is a bit misleading because the practices that are being banned in all the legislation, they can just be you went to your counselor's office and you said, I'm a girl when you're a boy,
Yeah.
and they refused to affirm you in that. They said, well, a lot of people think that at the moment, but
okay, that's different from whether conversion therapy of any sort should be banned. Because I think, right?
Yeah. Can I maybe say, since we're here together, we can join forces, or at least I think maybe what you would say, that you wouldn't call it a conversion therapy. You would call it a kind of therapy talk to see whether there is something deeper that needs change of affirmation of gender identity, the one hopes to, or there's something you're imitating your bigger brother. So it's not necessarily aims at taking away from you that desire. It's actually aims at exploring whether this desire, what kind of motivates it. So it's not a conversion therapy. It's therapy.
I think this is extremely helpful, because I hadn't fully clocked how much the name of it, which is its name, already builds in the ideology that it's just like sexual orientation. Because that's the thought, that the trans child really is trans if they say they are. And so to deny that or work against that is to work to convert them back to cisgender. So the model really is that these kinds of non-affirming counseling or prayer practices are attempts to change or suppress the identity of the trans person. And all I think that feminists like me are trying to say is lots of those people aren't trans, probably aren't.
Yeah, somehow the issue that I'm concerned about keeps getting skirted away.
Okay.
Because I find that the conversion therapy is highly dubious and motivated by all sorts of morally pernicious sorts of motives. And so I think that, and also an assumption too. I mean, okay, maybe whether gender identity should be paired with sexual orientation is an interesting issue in itself, in terms of how they are different. If one is socially constructed and the other is innate, okay, that's interesting. But regardless, you can, I think, do a lot of damage to someone who says, I feel myself, I'm a biologically male, I feel myself a woman. And you tell them, okay, we're going to tell you that you are wrong to have those kinds of identification, and we're going to make sure that you retain your biological identity. That assumes for one that it's wrong to have that identity, and for another, it's going to harm someone to tell them that they are wrong to have that. What is required is that they have, I mean, what might be required is what some of the other people have touched on, is that they have therapy if they're having trouble with, accepting themselves or being accepted or something like this. And so to undergo therapy that helps them explore their identity, rather than tell them that they ought not to be what they feel that they are. And so I don't think you're really addressing the problem about conversion therapy. That the intent, as I take it, of the legislation is to prevent the kinds of conversion techniques that some therapists use that can be harmful to people with gender identity issues. And you seem to always sort of bypass that question. Well, it's a scientific distinction we're making here. Well, I don't understand why.
No, I know. Look, you seem to have a strong intuitive sense of what conversion therapy means, and that's fine. But it's not the sense in the legislation that is in place in my state. So that's okay. Like, I certainly think if that was what conversion therapy meant, always loaded with moral disapprobation and disapproval.
No. I didn't say that it was loaded with. I said
you said it involves telling a person that it's wrong to be who they are.
No, that's a consequence. No, I didn't say that was a technique. I said that's a consequence of it. I mean, look, you said that you are okay for prayer as a technique for telling somebody with gender identity to to pray about it so that what? So that they can get clear about their identity, or that they can go back to their biological sex? What is the objective there?
Well, say the priest did think that so few people are really trans that it's a safe bet that this person isn't, and they prayed together that they would regain a non-trans identity. Would you think that should be prohibited in law for the priest to do that? Because I think I don't.
Maybe it's different if you're, in religious context. It's not something that should support and say, yes, it's okay.
Or prohibit. But yeah, but that's what they're doing. They're prohibiting it. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think maybe the disagreement is not big, but maybe we should leave room for others who have been around. So I don't. I lost a bit of the order, but I think we have Fida and we have Imad Muhammad. Let's start with Fida.
Thank you, Holly, for this talk.
Yes, please, Fida. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just thanking Holly for the talk. I just have some, two issues that I'm trying to work around. I think much like the commentators who have spoken before me, I think that having prefaced what conversion therapy, what means of conversion therapy you want to discuss, like prayers and the talk therapy at the very beginning, and then went on to explain why you think those should not be prohibited if they're, initiated by the person and they're consented by the person who wants them. I think what happened, and it's obvious from the commentators, that this is a slippery slope from saying, these two are maybe prohibited to thinking about conversion therapy as, something that is harmful. That's really, really harmful. That's one thing. And the second, when you said that the harms of talk therapy constitute shame and guilt, that they're not really that harmful in comparison to other types of conversion therapy, like, of course, like medicines or hormonal therapy or things of that sort. I'm tempted to disagree with you on that. I think they're quite harmful as well, especially telling someone who has maybe gender dysphoria or has or things that they are gay, to try and talk them out of it. It's not just the harm that is constituted is seriously problematic. That's one of the comments that I want to make. The second comment and / question is, as I understand you, I don't know if I'm understanding you correctly, you're trying to frame this, this whole issue, or maybe your anxieties or your troubles that are coming from this research is because this kind of move, the pairing of gender orientation and gender identity in these laws, is somehow reaffirming the gender binary, the gender binary somehow. And maybe that's something that is really upsetting as a feminist, as some feminists try to escape from that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
No, you are. Thanks. No, that's helpful. I think maybe the second thing you said, I didn't mean to say that I thought the kinds of psychological harms that come from having someone tell you you're not who you think you are, or moralizing that in any way, so that you feel guilt and shame. I didn't mean to say that they're not bad or are not as bad as some of the physical harms like medical interventions. What I think the question that I was responding to when I talked about that was to say that that kind of denial is harmful in the case of sexual orientation because this thing is kind of innate and can't really be suppressed. And if you try, most people who try fail. So I was trying to make the case that the harm of the shame and guilt comes from the sort of innateness and the unchangeability. And it's an open question whether that is actually a good characterization of gender identity. So if it isn't, then you wouldn't have the same harms, right? And so I think that's relevant to the discussion about what would be wrong with conversion in the one case, aiming at conversion in the one case compared to the other. I think you're right. Of course, this is coming out of, like, biographically, I think I've been concerned with what's going on with the gender identity movement and ideology and its interaction with feminism, or at least the kind of feminism that I would want to see, and with like lesbian and gay rights. I don't like a lot of what's going on there, and I've spent more time working on and articulated more stuff in what I see as the conflict of interest with women's rights. So it's true that that's kind of where my interest in trans populations and gender identity came from. But yeah, I am trying to bracket off in this talk the question of, like, what's going on here, which is really like, yeah, it's kind of weird that these two things are just kind of constantly getting buddied together in these acronyms and in this, all of this, like 3 bits of legislation so far. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of try to approach that on its own merits rather than running it through the feminist argument. But that's definitely sort of in my motivations for sure.
Thank you. I think I'm mad. You're next, and then I'll say if you were as well. Questions to Holly. Are you around? Is he around?
I can hear nothing. What did you just say?
No, I opened. Okay, Ahmad, are you? Okay, let's go to Lama then. Lama, you can. Okay, I'm not able to read the chat box. I have a microphone. Okay, so he has a question on the chat box. Let's see. Where is hello, I don't have a microphone. So I'll ask my question here. I'm currently presenting the research show, which shed light on the most recent discoveries in the field of research. We are currently working on an episode about sexuality and gender identity, and Dr. Bridget will be one of the guests to discuss it. Should we cover bisexuality, because the episode goal is to provide scientific interpretations to society like Lebanon, because there are controversial options in this orientation? I'm not sure how much my question is relevant. Maybe since that's about Lebanon, I think our guest is not the best person to give you an advice on what is good to present for Lebanon. So maybe we can, unless Kholi wants to say something about that.
Yeah,
but yeah, but let's go then to Lama.
Yes, thank you. Professor Lawford, I think you've mentioned that gender identity is not innate, which is true, and so you compared that to sexuality, which is, I mean, I'm not sure, research hasn't shown yet, but we can take it as something that is there, and we don't know why, but it's there and it's unchangeable. The fact that gender identity is learned doesn't mean that it's not something that you can change. There's children who express their trans identity since like very, very young ages, right? And so they still persevere with that identity, although it does not conform. Having the idea that you want to ban conversion therapy because it's harmful for gender, for sexuality, not conforming people in the terms of queerness, like gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, other individuals,
That's true, because, conversion therapy is harmful and it has all of its dangers, because, that causes trauma from someone who is coming out and going into the world and expressing who they are, although, they will be fought and there are consequences that are life endangering. And so to be able to, ban this thing that tells them that they're not someone who should be like that, and enforce a narrative that does not conform with who they are, is really harmful. But there is also the same thing for gender identity, because, for someone to come out to the world and say that I am not a girl, although I was assigned that sex at birth, is also something that takes a lot of courage. That is something, sometimes life-changing. And the damages of that therapy is of being told that you are not that, or maybe you're confused, or maybe your dysphoria is just, being uncomfortable with your body, is not something that should be acceptable, and it should be banned altogether, even if it's not the same innate sexuality that is not changeable, because also gender identity is not changeable, even if it's something that you learn. If you ask a woman why she is a woman, besides, being told that she is, how do you define that? How do you define masculinity? How do you define femininity, besides things that we have assigned for ourselves? And sometimes, people, they just feel that they are and know that they are something that does not match with what they are told they are. And that's not something that you can invalidate. And as for, you said that you don't like how gender identity and sexual orientation are lumped together in a feminist movement. I would like to, present an idea that maybe would make sense into bringing these two together. So basically, modern feminism is basically going against the traditional assigned gender roles, right? So you have segregation of in the workplace, you have segregation of occupation, you have, property rights, you have the right to be outside of the home, to be autonomous. That was how it started, and that's one of the traditional expectations that were, attributed to biological differences, which does not hold true right now. And that's how that starts. And then you go further with that, and you challenge the traditional gender roles, and that's how queer activism goes into feminism, which is basically the assigned gender role is that you're a woman, you're supposed to love a man. But what if you don't? You get the right not to. And that's also feminist. And at the same time, if you're assigned female and you're expected to be raised as a girl, and then you're just not, and you go against those gender norms and you just express your identity, then that's also, just challenging the gender status quo and the heteronormative, the heteronormative patriarchy. And that's just one way to put it together, and that's still feminist.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about your last claim. I mean, I think there's a huge difference, right, between the female person who's highly gender non-conforming and is still saying that she's female, right? Because then she is a counterexample to what she's atypical, she's providing a new way of being female, she's challenging norms. As soon as that tips into now she's non-binary, now she's a man, I think that's no longer providing any challenge at all, at least to women's possibilities, right? Because she's almost gone so far as to say, the way that I am it's not a woman, it's not compatible with being a woman, it's not diversity in ways to be a woman. Indeed, my difference makes me not a woman at all anymore, or makes me a man. So I see a lot that's kind of really, really regressive in that. And of course you might want to say, okay, well, maybe it's not like good for women per se, or it's not feminist per se, but still, like, it's a challenge to the sex binary, or it's a challenge to heteronormativity. Maybe, but I sort of think that, like, the second wave is just like wanting to free people to be their sex with no expectations had a more interesting and ambitious project than just this idea that, like, everyone can choose their narrow gender box. So I think I'm really not buying that second idea. I did want to comment on the first thing. So you said, I think you made a good point, which is that maybe it doesn't matter so much if gender identity is innate. What matters is whether it's unchangeable. So it could be socialized, it could become fixed in early childhood, and then it could just be unchangeable. And if it is, maybe it's just as harmful, right, to be subject to these sorts of change or suppression practices, conversion practices. And I think it could be right, but again, I think a big difference that maybe our contexts are characterized very differently, and so this is hard to communicate, but what is going on with gender identity ideology in countries like mine and the UK is absolutely not the case that there are just these people who are somehow this identity becomes fixed and then it couldn't be changed. Like the numbers, the changes in the cohort, and the total difference in the epidemiology over time, it's just really not plausible that that's what's going on with everybody who's claiming a trans identification today. And I think that really changes how we think about things. If it's not the case that that is completely unchangeable, then it's not the case that being told by someone else that you're not what you say you are would do the same kinds of harms. I know I've said this in response to various different people. And indeed, it might save you from certain sorts of harms, because it might save you from ending up on a trajectory where you're medically dependent, or where you end up having unnecessary surgeries, or where you end up detransitioning later in life and experiencing regret. So it's just like very different reasons, considering what's going on with the trans cohorts in progressive countries.
Thank you. I mean, I know there's a lot to be said and I'm not giving the chance for the people question to come back to your response, which I feel sometimes frustrates me what happens to me. But you know, Ahmad says I didn't give you the chance to respond to his question about should they cover bisexuality, because the episode's goal is to provide scientific interpretation of society like Lebanon. And I thought you said something about this that's not your, but I want to hear from you. What do you have anything about this question, or Holly, to Ahmad? I think you can read it in your chat box as well. The question about they're doing episodes on a show on
oh no,
sexuality.
sorry. You did ask me, and I agreed with you that I don't know enough about the context to comment on that. And I'm also not an expert in sexual orientation science, although I've read quite a lot. I think there's interesting differences between men's and women's, but I don't have any particular contribution to make on bisexuality. So sorry to be unhelpful.
Can I have maybe make some comments or questions to you, Holly, at the end of this? Give myself some rights here. There is this concern about lumping in gender identity with sexuality and sexual orientation. And I think you can make your, I imagine you can make your claim milder about conversion, because the word conversion appears too strong. So it wouldn't harm your argument if you say, in the case of gender identity, we should not take the request of, say, for example, the minor to have a affirmative therapy, which includes hormonal changes with certain effects at face value, and act on it. We should try to do some talk and see whether there are other lying causes. We shouldn't do that with gay minors who want, because in that case they are not doing any kind of strong intervention. So we shouldn't. Why do we need to have therapy if the only thing that whether gender or in the case of sexual orientation, when what's request does not involve irreversible intervention or difficult to reverse intervention? So we can say, look, in the case that there's no intervention, we don't need to have talk. We just let them evolve, and then they discover themselves later as something else, and that's fine. So only in that particular case where you have irreversible medical intervention, or at least, strong intervention, it requires hormonal treatment and stuff like that, and mastectomy and all of these things, then you have to pause a bit and say, okay, let's talk about it, not with the aim of convincing you that you are mistaken about your identity, but with the aim of identifying the sources, which may not be innateness, but something else happening there, and you might not go through this tough procedure at the age of 9 or 11 or 10, whatever it is, and that will give you the chance to reconsider. Isn't that what you are, the harm that can be done there? Now, this argument requires that you are separating sexual orientation from gender identity, but it's only for the practical purposes to be operating in those cases. Would that?
I think, but the problem is that it's just the parents have to make a choice, or the teachers or whatever. Your little boy comes home and says he's a girl, and he wants a girl's name, and he wants to start wearing girls' clothes, and he wants you to tell the school that he'll be in the girls' dance classes or gym changing room. There's no, like with sexual orientation, of course you can just say, yeah, you might be gay, that's fine. You figure it out, or you experiment a little when you're old enough and see how you feel. But with gender transition, a choice does have to be made about whether you're going to go along with it and support it or refuse it. And the worry is, and again, I'm sure there'll be more evidence about this kind of later on. I think there's already substantial evidence that there's a lock-in from puberty blockers and to cross-sex hormones to surgeries. The question is whether social transition is part of that lock-in pathway. And from what I understand, it certainly strongly increases the probability. So if what you're doing is deciding whether to put your kid on a conveyor belt to a lifetime of medical dependency and possible surgeries when they might not actually have been trans as a kid, that's like a huge decision. So it's not enough just to kind of let them figure it out. I think, and this is why I've been talking about conversion, right? Because I think what parents are worried about is that they kind of might want the freedom to say in cases where they're skeptical, no, you really aren't a girl.
Yeah, but in this case, they're asking also for the social arrangements to be different. So that affects others as well.
Yeah, but that's what is happening here in Australia.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that not because of the harm done to them of that thing, but because there is consequences to others if you want to accept their non-interventionist conversion, socializing into this new identity. So it's not that they have to buy them dresses. That's fine. But then which swimming team they compete in becomes about others. Which football team they play with in the school becomes about something else. So in a way, that would be something about how this affects others, which might be another topic. One more question, which I am confused about a bit here, which is there is this talk about the socially constructed sexual orientation and identity. And some people think that everything is socially constructed, but even if it's socially constructed, they also accept, which I think is a good thing. Yeah, I agree with that it can be quite hardened, even if it's socially constructed. So it's not enough to be socially constructed to dismiss it as something which is. But when these people who say conversion for gays and lesbians is wrong because these are innate, are they going against the scientific literature which affirms the innateness of these traits? Is it going against the socially constructed idea of sexual orientation? So in a way, those who affirm that sexual orientation is always socially constructed would not accept the scientific community in claiming that they are innate. Is there a conflict there between the claim of innateness that justifies rejecting conversion because it's innate, or and therefore we should rely on the innateness, and the question becomes about innateness, or if you say it's all socially constructed, and this might open the door for say, okay, well, we're going to change society that would not allow you to have this kind of, or would not even invite you into identifying as such, because this is all socially constructed. So if in a society that is constructed in such a way as these ideas there's no choice option for these things, that will go away. So in a way, I'm not so sure what's the relation between social constructedness here and the innateness claim about this sexual orientation. Can you shed light on this for a novice like me in these issues?
No, I think that is right. And it's interesting because in like the 70s, when the sort of gay pride movement was really taking off, or was really like at its peak, there was this tension between the academics inspired by Foucault, who are all kind of social constructionists about almost everything and definitely about sexuality, and then the like boots on the ground gay activists who were like very much embracing the born this way narrative for political reasons, right? Because they thought that gave them the strongest claim to rights and respect and social tolerance because they can't help being that way. So I think it's true that there's the sense that like the innateness claim gives you a stronger moral and political position, and the social constructionist claim makes you vulnerable to like, well, let's just start constructing things differently. And of course, that's a bit silly, right? Because you can have socially constructed something over a long period of history, and it can be harder to break down than something material that's not socially constructed, right? Like you can bomb a building, but you can't change the money system or whatever. So there is some like flippancy about how easily we can change things if they were socially constructed, but I certainly think that tension does exist, and it has shown up in like activist communities or between academics and activists.
Yeah, I mean, we'll end here, but we have a final comment by Badr Abu Ali, because I think he has a small finger commenting on the things we were discussing. I hope so. Badr, you're unmuted.
Yes, I do want to comment on the discussion you're having, which is, I really like your point, Dr. Haider, which is that when it comes to discussing conversion therapy, if it's conversion therapy for social transition, then there's not much of a point in discussing it, because we're not talking about a transition that will lead to some kind of harm that we would have to take this measure. And when it comes to conversion therapy, when it's targeting individuals that want to transition medically through hormones and surgeries and so on, there are already guidelines in place. And here I want to give a voice to Dr. Brigitte Khoury, who is commenting on this with excellent comments, but they're going unnoticed. So
I'm not able to read the comments.
I will read them for you. So
yeah,
Dr. Khoury said in the chat, it is up to the mental health experts to draw guidelines on interventions for kids with gender identity questions and issues, which can include criteria for consent depending on age, including the parents, etc. And the American Psychological Association has already worked on these guidelines already, and these should then dictate the laws. And also, parents taking their kids to psychotherapy is what needs to explore their identity is what needs to be done, and anyway, no gender transforming intervention is done without a long process of therapy so that the person is ready for the next step. It is recommended by the guidelines for them to live as the desired gender for 1 year before any medical or surgical intervention is done. So it's not like these medical strong interventions, as you call them, Dr. Haider, are being done on a whim. It's not just because one day a boy started acting effeminate that they go to surgery. There are already guidelines in place that are put in place by experts, and these should be our guidance for how we legislate these issues.
Yeah, look, this might be true in Lebanon. I have no reason to disbelieve that, but it's not true everywhere in the world. It's absolutely not true in Australia or in the UK. So there's lots of testimony of detransitioners who say that they showed up to one appointment and then were given cross-sex hormones, for example. And these are people who have later come to regret that process, or to think that there were other things going on for them than being trans, but they had kind of self-misdiagnosed that as a transgender identity. So it's not the case that those kind of like lengthy safeguards are in place in every country, including countries that claim to have. So we have experts in Australia going on left-wing media programs claiming that there's this kind of long process of gatekeeping and caution and so on. And then you have actual people who have been treated by them speaking out and saying that it's really not what those people are saying it is. And also, you know, the UK guidelines, I think, are still living for 2 years in the gender you wish to acquire. And that's what their huge fight for the last 4 years or so has been about, because they wanted to shift to self-ID, which means you just pay your $20 and then you self-identify, you make a statutory declaration so you can change your legal sex. And I think it was up to once a year. And that's the system that we have in my state of Australia and is also in Tasmania. So there's no living as for any period of time. Any man who wants to change his legal sex to female can do so tomorrow by paying a very minimal fee. And again, feminists have a problem with that. And that's separate to this talk, but it's just to say that the guidelines and the practices are very different in different countries. And the ones that have gone the furthest have gone like really, really far in ways that I think like are objectionable and are causing problems.
Yeah, but I mean,
if I may respond to this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we agree that there are guidelines that dictate how these things should go. And to my knowledge, I'm a medical student. When a physician, or I think this also would apply for, or really this is actually relevant for psychiatrists and physicians, if they go against guidelines and the patient then feels harmed by the decision of the physician that is not supported by guidelines, they can sue the physician for malpractice, for harm. And so if this is an issue going on, I would imagine that it would self-correct simply through malpractice lawsuits if truly physicians are going against guidelines so that they can, I don't know, appeal to leftist ideology or whatever it is, then that would be a self-correcting issue. What we should be concerned with is that there are guidelines set by organizational bodies that are basing their guidelines on empirical science, regardless of ideology and opinions and political philosophy.
Yeah, agreed.
Look,
agreed.
I mean, can I comment this? I think, you know, of course, I refer to scientific community, but of course, the scientific community might also be affected by ideology and what's going around. So it's not that they are immune from these, but they still give us the only reference. But as I see that you're not disagreeing here, you all agree that there should be guidelines, should be, you know, strict guidelines about this. The question is that this is not the case in Australia, but maybe the case in some other place. And then there's not you're not disagreeing here. You're simply basically agreeing. And Holly says you're right, but this is not the case in Australia and some other places who went, you know, overcorrecting for this issue. So I'm saying that there's an agreement here, more than a disagreement actually, between you two here on this. You accept that there should be cautious, there should be caution, there should be procedure, should be you know, regulations that are more tighter than simply paying $20, £20 to get this. So we agree on that. Whether I take Holly's claim about what's happening in Australia and the UK to be correct, but we can fact check her on this. So, yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry, Brigitte. If there's more comment, because you know you'll be featured in the your comment was read already. But if you have something, please raise your hand again. Yeah. Okay. I'll give you just a minute. Yeah. This is the last comment, so we'll free you to go to bed.
Yes, I'm sorry. Actually, I also have to run, but. I am very surprised actually, because I know that the British Psychological Society and the Australian Psychological Societies have also very similar and clear guidelines to the APA. So I will be happy to send them to you if you want on email. I doubt that somebody can pay £20 and start getting on hormone therapy. I'm sorry, I'm gonna say that, because the process takes much, much longer. Even just doing a clinical interview for that would take at least 2-3 visits. I'm going to stop right here. I have a clinic. I have to run. Thank you so much, Bashar, and thank you, Holly, for this.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Holly, any answer to this thing?
Just
about
for the record, yeah, I wasn't saying that it costs $20 to get hormones. The sex self-identification process is entirely separate from the medicalization process. So you can change your legal sex by paying $20 and having that processed. And then it's a separate thing whether you want to have a medical transition along with your legal transition. And there are detransitioners who have said what their process was like, and it's shockingly short and easy, and their holistic situation was not like properly assessed. So they have come to think that they were mistreated or not treated appropriately by the medical professionals. Maybe it's true that it was 2 or 3 sessions rather than half a year and checking about their child abuse or whatever. Like, but the point is like the stuff is too easy. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks all for your patience. Thank you, Holly, for your patience. I think it's almost 12 now in Melbourne, midnight. So we'll end it here. Thanks a lot, everybody, for voicing this. I think we should hope to continue the debate on this with the other speakers along the year and beyond this year as well. Thank you very much, all, and thank you for your attending and for your excellent questions. Thank you, Holly, for your talk and for everything, and we'll hope to see you again, maybe here in Lebanon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Cheers.